Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and this is the new Kia XCeed. A few years ago, a couple of cars came out that were going to revolutionise the hatchback segment, the Rover Streetwise and the Volkswagen Polo Dune. Do you remember them? Because their production run was actually very short-lived. No one could appreciate a hatchback with raised suspension and body cladding around the exterior to make it look like a mini off-roader. Roll on to today, and now every manufacturer is doing it, including Kia, which has come up with this, the XCeed. Now, whereas everyone else has just raised the suspension of one of their hatchbacks and put a bit of body cladding on it, Kia have gone one better. They've actually made a bespoke Ceed for that segment. And I've had this XCeed for a week, and I'm going to let you know what it's all about. When it comes to styling, I think we have to take our hats off to Kia for coming up with the XCeed. I think it's a very bold and confident statement from the Korean brand. They simply could have just taken a Ceed hatchback, given it some raised suspension and whacked some body cladding on it, but they haven't. Doing this, I actually think they're sending a message to the rest of the world that they're coming after some of the big guns. But what I love as well is actually the design of the XCeed as well. Personally, I think the front end looks better than the Ceed hatchback, but at the back of the car there are a couple of other cars I can see in its design language, namely the Vauxhall Astra and the Mark I Mercedes GLA. Now, let me know in the comments box if you agree with what I said. However, there is one thing about the design of the XCeed I'm not too keen on, and it is the fake exhausts at the rear. I think Kia should have just done away with them, or at least make real exhaust openings there. But anyway, it's just a minor quibble. But I do love the actual look of this XCeed, it's particularly the first edition, which is what I've got here, with the quantum yellow paint job. Now granted, if you want a first edition and you don't like this paint job, the only other choice is black, but they still look really good. I love the 18-inch alloy wheels, and there's just loads of curves and creases throughout its design. But is it a case though of form over function? Because in the profile view, it kind of looks like a mini BMW X4, and that kind of gives me a bit of a worrying thought if perhaps it's not as practical as the Ceed hatchback. But on that note, I think that's enough of looking at the outside of the XCeed. Let's have a little look at the inside. Sat in the front of the XCeed, you are greeted by a very comfortable, and on this particular first edition trim, a very funky interior design. Now firstly, the XCeed rides about 44mm higher than the Ceed hatchback, so if you have any mobility issues and you are after a hatchback car, this could be one to consider, because it is easier getting in and out of the XCeed than it would be the normal Ceed hatchback. And then once you're sat in place, you do find that these front seats are incredibly comfortable, and they even hold a big bear like me in place. There's plenty of adjustment in the seat as well, because on this first edition they are electrically adjustable, so getting the perfect driving position is easy. Even the steering wheel comes with both rake and reach adjustment, which is absolutely brilliant. Now the front passenger seat isn't electrically adjustable, but you do get electrically adjustable lumbar support, so that is a bonus. And I just love the design of these seats, and I love the use of fabric and leatherettes on the outer bolsters. Also the contrasting yellow stitching. I just love the design, and two things came to mind when I first received the XCeed for review. Firstly, I thought about Lamborghinis, because this very much feels like the hexagonal design that Lamborghinis have got, particularly on something like the Huracan. And secondly, it reminded me of the old 1980s game show Blockbuster. Definitely Google that if you don't know what I'm on about. But they are incredibly comfortable, and they do brighten up this interior. Interior quality is really good in here as well. We've got soft touch plastics on top of the dash and on the center section here. We've even got some faux stitching to give it a more upmarket effect. And we've got soft touch plastics here on top of the doors, as well as leatherette again with contrasting yellow stitching on the door panels. And then lower down, yes, we have got some hard scratchy plastics, but they actually feel of a decent quality. It feels better screwed together in here than a Ford Focus. Cubby spaces are really good in here as well. We got some decent sized door bins where you can get a medium or large size bottle of drink. However, they're not lined with any fabric, so any loose items will rattle around a bit. Then in front of the gear lever, we got a little area here where we got 2 USB inputs and a 12-volt socket, and you can put some change or something in there and keep it covered with a really well damped cover. Just above that, we have got a little shelving area where on this particular car we have got wireless charging, but it's a nice place to store your phone. Then behind the gear lever we have got a couple of cup holders, and they actually come with a cover as well, which is a nice pleasant surprise. And as you can see, you can get your thermos in there nice and easy. Just be aware though, if you have any bottles of drink and you've got the manual version of the XCeed, you might find it gets in the way. Then there is a little bit of extra space here next to the cup holders, probably to put your key in whilst you're driving. And then under the armrest, we actually have got a decent amount of space there as well, but there's no 12-volt socket or anything like that else in there. And then also, the glove box is of a decent size. Again, it's not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit, but the book pack for the XCeed is absolutely huge. That is quite surprising and takes up about 50-60% of the room in there. But all in all, it's actually just a really well laid out interior here in the XCeed. We've got a digital dashboard on this first edition version, and I love the dials and actually the just clarity of the screen. It's very easy to read when on the move. The only thing I'm a little bit gutted with is that it's not as customizable as something like a Seat Leon, where you can have things like the map cover the entire screen. I think very much Volkswagen Group have got that to themselves. But on this first edition, we've also got a 10.25 inch touchscreen, and it's actually nice and easy to use when on the move. We've got some shortcut buttons here on the bottom, and they are touch sensitive. But some of the graphics, again, just not as sharp as some of its Volkswagen Group counterparts. Then underneath there we have got your dual zone climate control, and it's really nice, all physical buttons, something that I really like. Just underneath there we have got heated seats and a heated steering wheel. The only thing that's really missing on this first edition is actually ventilated seats. That would be an added bonus. And then just behind the gear lever we have got the handbrake, which is electric, and an auto hold button. And also, as I'm sat here, because I've got thick muscular legs, I am actually covering a row of buttons next to the gear lever, and that gives you your sport mode, your start-stop system, front and rear parking sensors, and also self-parking. And with this being a Korean car, of course, underneath the driver's side air vent, we have got a couple of additional buttons that act for your driver aids. One feature I really do like is that actually when you start and stop the car and you want to get in and out, the seat actually moves back to make it easier to exit the vehicle. It's one feature I think that makes it feel like a bit of a premium car in here. But all in all, I really love the interior of this XCeed. It's very easy to kind of get used to the layout, and it's very comfortable in here as well. And I think that's enough of looking at the front of the XCeed. Let's have a little sit in the back. Sat in the back of the XCeed, you're probably expecting it to be really cramped and claustrophobic back here, but it's actually a pleasant surprise. Now firstly, that driver's seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'7" tall and 5'7" wide, and as you can see I've got a good amount of knee room, and headroom is not too bad at all, even though we have got a sunroof on this trim level. Now I have had a couple of 6-footers sat in the back of the XCeed, and they were absolutely fine for a long journey. Though I think anyone taller might feel a little bit cramped, but you can definitely get 4 adults in the XCeed. 5 at a push, because there's a very little hump on the centre seat, and there's a very little bump coming through the floor in the form of a transmission tunnel, so that is a nice pleasant surprise. Cubby spaces are okay as well. We've got some okay sized door bins. You can get a medium bottle of drink in there. We have got a couple of aeroplane style pockets on the backs of the front seats, and then we have also got an armrest with a couple of cup holders, and as an added bonus you can get the centre section down to load any longer items through from the boot, so that is a huge bonus. However, on lower down trims in the XCeed range you don't get this feature. You also have ISOFIX supports on the outer seats, and what I love about them is that they are hinged covers. So it makes it really easy loading or fixing a child seat. They haven't gone with the way of Volkswagen Group by having plastic covers that are easy to break or easy to lose. Also, the windows themselves are of a decent size, but as you can see they don't quite open all the way down, but I can rest my arm on the windowsill. And then there is a nice added bonus here, or added button I should say, where you actually have heated seats in the rear. Then we have got a couple of air vents in here so you can stay cool. The only thing that's really actually lacking back here are any charging ports for any devices back here. So if you have got kids back here and they need to charge their mobile phone, be prepared for them to shout at you because there's nothing back here to help them charge. But all in all, it's actually a surprisingly comfortable area here in the back of the XCeed. The one thing I will mention is it can feel a little bit dark because the C-pillars are quite thick here in the XCeed, and yeah, it does mean it can be a little bit darker in here compared to other vehicles. But all in all, it is very spacious and surprisingly well equipped. Now I think that's enough of the back of the XCeed. Let's have a little look at the boot. Opening the boot of the XCeed presents you with 426 litres of space, which is actually 31 litres bigger than the XCeed hatchback, which is really surprising given the XCeed's kind of coupe SUV styling. Also, the XCeed's main rival is the Ford Focus Active, because that's a car you can have both as an estate or a hatchback with the raised ride height and body cladding. And in hatchback form, it has got a boot capacity of 375 litres, so this is much better than the Ford Focus Active. And what I like as well is that it's not devoid of features. We've got some good tethering hooks here as well that feel nice and sturdy. We've got a 12-volt socket, we've got a couple of shopping hooks as well, a little extra cubby space on the side, and a variable boot floor. And even with the boot in its higher settings, something I will mention is that there's a tiny bit of a boot lip on the side there, but it's not enough to kind of make you worry too much, and there's a kind of scuff plate there so you make sure you don't damage the paint job. The only thing that's a bit disappointing is that you can't put the parcel shelf underneath the boot floor, which was quite surprising. But underneath, you have got room for a space saver spare wheel, so that is an added bonus. And also on this first edition version, we have got the 40-20-40 split in the seats, so that means there's lots of versatility when putting any large bulky items into the XCeed. And we've also got here a couple of subwoofers and speakers for the JBL sound system, and I'll be honest, it sounds absolutely brilliant. So I am really surprised and pleasantly surprised by the amount of practicality that the XCeed gives you. It's actually kind of one of the class best in terms of a main family size hatchback that's been lifted up. But yeah, I really am liking it, and I think that's enough of looking at the practicality side of the XCeed. I think it's time we take it for a drive. So once you get driving in the XCeed, first impressions are really good. It's a lovely, comfortable and easy car to drive. Visibility is pretty good as well, but it's not class best. So looking at the front of the car is absolutely fine. We've got some reasonably thick A-pillars, but they're about the same thickness as most of the other cars you get in this segment. But because they're quite steeply raised, you don't find yourself looking around them at junctions, which is actually a pleasant surprise. However, looking over your shoulder, you do find there's quite a thick C-pillar there, so it does create a bit of a blind spot. But on this first edition, I have got blind spot monitoring, which has helped me out a couple of times. But then looking at the rear of the XCeed is not too bad as well. You can see everything out of the rear view window, but it's also not the biggest of windows at the back because of that coupe crossover SUV styling, but it's still not too bad. All in all, first impressions of the XCeed are really good. I mean, there's very little wind noise coming off the wing mirrors, and actually refinement levels just feel really good as well. There's very little tyre roar, and engine noise is kept to a minimum as well if you're just pootling along at a normal pace. So yeah, first impressions of the XCeed are very good. So when it comes to trim levels in the XCeed range, there are 4 to choose from. The entry-level edition, the 2, the 3, and this top of the range first edition. Now my pick of the range would be, actually, depending on what you're after, either the 2 or the 3, because they'll have pretty much everything that you want in a car in regards to kind of dual zone climate control, reversing sensors and camera, cruise control as well. But if you want all the bells and whistles, then of course go for the first edition, and you get things like front parking sensors, you got blind spot as well. But the only thing I would say on this first edition that I feel it's lacking compared to other Kias I have driven is ventilated seats, and that was a bit of a surprise. I do remember driving the first edition XCeed hatchback, and that did have ventilated seats, and it was a very welcome addition to the first edition. But you can get ventilated seats on the XCeed, but that's if you go for the PHEV version, and that's a car that starts at around about £30,000. But if you're on the first edition PHEV XCeed, then you're looking at around about £34,000 for it. And that's quite a lot of money for a raised hatchback, especially when you put it against some of its rivals. Engine choices in the XCeed range, well, just like the trim levels, there are 4 to choose from, 3 petrols and 1 diesel. Now the petrol engines are an entry-level 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged unit, and that is only available with a manual gearbox. We've got this 1.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol unit producing 138 brake horsepower, and you can have that either with a 6-speed manual or what I've got here, a 7-speed dual clutch transmission or DCT. And then there is a 1.6 litre petrol, but that's only available with the plug-in hybrid, and that is DCT only. And then the diesel is a 1.6 litre unit, and just like the 1 litre petrol, that only comes with a manual gearbox. But the engine I've got with this first edition is actually my pick of the range. You got 138 brake horsepower, which is enough power for a car this size, although many of its rivals tend to have around about 10 brake horsepower more, about 148 brake horsepower. But you know what, it's pretty responsive, it feels good under load, although sometimes it can feel a little bit strained at higher revs. And in terms of kind of launching and overtaking, the gearbox is pretty responsive as well. You can get that slight bit of hesitation which you expect from a dual clutch transmission. I mean, this is by no means a hot hatch, but all in all it just suits the XCeed really well. It's a nice decent performer. I'm driving now on the motorway, and in terms of miles per gallon, well, Kia say I should get around 42 miles per gallon on a combined cycle, and that's with a WLTP methods. But I'll be honest, I've actually achieved 41 miles per gallon driving around on a couple of these A roads, and actually I'm on an A road, not the motorway, I do apologise. And I actually think if I did a longer journey on this road, I could easily go over that 42 miles per gallon. I actually think Kia are being quite modest with those figures. But in terms of just the engine itself, it is really nice. It's nice and peppy and responsive. And as I said, the only drawback is if you have it in sport mode, or if you just put your foot down and it gets to higher revs, the engine can just sound and feel a little bit strained and, you know, just lacking that bit of extra power that some of its rivals have. But in terms of day-to-day driving, it's absolutely fine, and that's why it's my pick of the range. So what's the ride and handling like in the XCeed? Well, when you look at the XCeed, you're probably expecting it to ride like a crossover or a mini SUV. Just be quite wafty and compliant, and just almost have a very soft suspension setup. But the truth is actually quite the opposite. It feels like a hatchback. Now granted, it is a little bit softer than the XCeed hatchback, but in terms of just general ride, it feels like a normal hatchback. And that's no bad thing. I mean, it deals with the bumps and imperfections really well. Yes, if you go over quite a severe manhole cover or pothole, it will boom and resonate into the cabin. But all in all, it deals with the bumps and imperfections well. If you go over a rough road surface, sometimes it can feel a little bit unsettled. And the only real intrusion actually into the cabin, regards refinement, is tyre noise. I mean, I'm driving over the road now about 45 miles an hour, and there's a little bit of tyre roar coming into the cabin. But if you drive over a nice bit of tarmac, it's absolutely fine. But yeah, the ride it feels like a normal XCeed, just a little bit softer, but it is still a nice, lovely, compliant car. And then comes the handling. So firstly, the steering wheel feels lovely in my hands as I go around this roundabout, but this is the thing. There's an element of fun to the XCeed. I mean, I was expecting the steering to be really light and be completely devoid of feel, but it's a bit of the opposite again. It's really quite sharp and eager to turn. Now, yes, in terms of feel, cars like the Ford Focus handle a lot better than the XCeed. That is the class king, but it's absolutely fine, and there is an element of fun to the XCeed that I was in no way expecting. It's kind of like a very warm hot hatch in some regard. Now, yes, there is a little bit of lean and roll as you dart into the corners, but it's in no way as bad as some SUVs I've driven, and it still feels, the XCeed, very compliant and grippy in terms of holding onto the road. It's a genuinely fun little car to drive. I say little car, family hatchback to drive. I am pleasantly surprised by it. So definitely, if you are expecting the XCeed to be this very relaxing, very calm kind of crossover, definitely take a test drive first to make sure you like it. But all in all, I am really, really impressed with how the XCeed rides and handles. Now, when it comes to niggles in the XCeed, I've actually only come across two. Now, one of them is an extension of what I've mentioned earlier, and the other one is something you'll definitely find out for yourself, especially if you've not driven a Kia before. So, as I mentioned earlier, the digital display is really lovely and clear. I really like it. I just wish it had the same customization that you got from something like a Seat Leon with their digital cockpits. I'm going to add on to that, which is when you put the XCeed into sport mode, the dials change and they have this nice new look to them, and I really do love that look. I just wish I could have these dials for normal mode instead of sport, and I've tried to have a little look through the menu systems and I don't think I can. I think I could only have these dials with sport mode and then have the normal ones under normal mode. So that's something I would really love to have the option to change, because I love the sport dials. Now, the second thing I've come across as a niggle, and I'll just put it back into normal mode, is that when you're driving along and you're listening to your tunes, when you want to adjust the volume, you use the little rocker switch on the steering wheel, and there are two rocker switches on the left hand side of the steering wheel. Both are linked to the media system. So the left hand one does the volume and the right hand one changes track. Now, when you do the volume, usually if you rocker upwards, it makes the song louder. If you rocker downwards, it makes the song quieter. That's a given. If then you want to change the track, usually when you rocker upwards, you go to the next track, and if you rocker downwards, you either go to the beginning of the track you were listening to, or if you press it a couple of times, you go to the previous track. Not in the XCeed. When you rocker upwards, you actually go to the beginning of the track you're listening to, and the amount of times that's caught me off guard is just nearly a dozen times, I think, since I've had the XCeed, and it's the most simplest thing to get right. You just got to switch this round, and again, I've had a little look in the menu systems, and I don't think you can kind of play with that option, and that's one thing that has just caught me off guard, and it's such a simple thing, because every car tends to have it the same way. You rocker upwards, next track, you rocker downwards, previous track. But no, in the XCeed it's the other way round, and because it's right next to the volume, which does it the way you would expect, it really does catch you off guard, and I can imagine some people just getting quite vexed because of that happening to them. So that's something just to kind of be aware of, and if you go for a test drive in the XCeed, just make sure you're happy with that configuration, because although now I'm used to it, I could just imagine people still getting caught off guard whilst they're driving and just kind of infuriating them because they have to go the other way round in order to change track. So those are really the two big niggles I've come across in the XCeed. So what are my thoughts on the new Kia XCeed? Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again, you've got to take your hats off to Kia because they have been very bold and confident in creating the XCeed, creating a bespoke car for this segment. All other manufacturers have simply just taken a popular hatchback, put up the suspension a little bit and just whacked on some body cladding. But fair play to the Korean brand for actually going the step forward and creating a bespoke model for that segment. It looks really good. It definitely stands out when you park it up in the car park, and it drives and rides really well at the same time. Kia haven't actually made a bad car with the XCeed, and it is really well equipped. Now yes, in regards to prices and against some of its rivals, it can seem 29 grand a little bit expensive, and if you are looking at the plug-in hybrid version of the XCeed, I'd recommend looking at the Nero instead, or possibly the Seed Sportwagon PHEV, because you actually get a bigger boot, and yes, it might only be in 3 spec, but that's one of the spec levels I recommended. But I really am liking the XCeed. It does turn heads, especially in this quantum yellow, and all in all it's just a really good car all round. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the new Kia XCeed. Now of course I always say please like the video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. I am of course on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and always recommend you follow on there as well for additional content, including still images and live videos, not just of the cars I review, but any cars I might come across or any events I go to. If you have any questions about the XCeed, please put them down in the comments section below. And are you an XCeed owner? Is there anything that I've missed? Well, of course, put them down as well in the comments section below. But guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and all I ask is, I think that was the blind spot monitoring going there. All I ask is that you all stay safe, have a wonderful day, maintain your social distancing, and I will catch you all in the next video. So take care everyone, and bye bye.